Hey guys, tonight we wander into the smoky, noisy, grease-splattered world of medieval street food. The air smells like roasted onions, wood smoke, and something unidentifiable but probably edible. You shuffle through a crowded market square, feet squelching in mud, dodging a goose, while a vendor yells about his hot meat rolls, which may or may not include meat. This is junk food, 13th century style, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this snack run with your dignity, digestion, or coin purse intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy tonight, post your location and local time. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push past a man selling garlic on a stick and duck under a swinging sign with a pig painted on it. Poorly, you think. At your feet, someone's dropped half a pie. A stray dog sniffs it, decides better, and walks away. Not a good sign. Still, the crowd keeps eating. In the medieval urban market, food was everywhere, cheap, handheld, greasy, and fast. The ancient equivalent of a drive-through, minus the hygiene and windows. Vendors shouted above the din, hawking hot cheese curds, spiced flatbreads, herring pies, and deep-fried dough blobs that looked like something your cousin once dared you to eat on a dare. You didn't survive that either. No one cared about balanced nutrition. The point was fast calories, salt, fat, heat, chew, go. One popular favorite was a sort of proto-fry, bread chunks soaked in bacon grease and fried again until crispy, often dusted with stale herbs or salt if you were lucky. If you weren't, you bit into a pebble. Surprise mineral intake. Historians still argue whether this greasy fare was safer than the water, or if people just wanted to die full of flavor. Probably both. And yes, there were vegetables somewhere, hidden in thick pottage or mashed beyond recognition. But the street was ruled by meat pies, fried cheese, roasted chestnuts, and anything that could be held in a single grubby hand. A chronicler in London once described market food as hot, heady, and hostile to the gut. He also confessed to eating 3 pastries before vomiting near a fishmonger. His diary ended there. You pause near a woman selling turnip fritters, which smell better than they have any right to. They're sizzling in oil that may have seen 4 reigns of kings. She offers you one wrapped in paper made from old prayer notes. You bite in. It's crunchy, earthy, a little sweet. You keep chewing, deciding if you like it. You do. That's the dangerous part, because junk food back then wasn't just a treat, it was an addiction of sorts. Even in an era when people feared gluttony as a sin, they still made room for that deep-fried moment of joy between plague waves and pig taxes. Kids chased vendors selling honey sticks, literally twigs dipped in thickened honey. Adults slurped beer and crunched candied almonds sold in greasy pouches. And sometimes, things got weird. One monk wrote about a street delicacy involving cheese curds rolled in ashes and grilled over pine branches. He described it as sinful on the tongue, holy in the soul. He later took a vow of silence. Coincidence? Food stalls were everywhere, near churches, bathhouses, public squares. Some even offered meal deals. Buy 2 pies, get a pickled egg. Not a great deal, but still a deal. The food wasn't just fast. It was flavor-forward, heavy on salt, herbs, and anything that could distract you from the underlying texture. You once bit into a chicken roll that might have been seagull, or squirrel, or just very optimistic bread. Still, you kept eating. Because here, in this chaotic square filled with shouting, sizzling, and the sound of 10 different songs being sung badly at once, you're full. Not just of food, but of that strange, cozy contentment that comes from eating with your hands, not knowing what you're eating, and somehow feeling okay with it. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve. The sleeve had other plans. You keep walking. And as the last bit of crust crunches between your teeth, you realize something profound. The past might have been miserable, but it sure tasted interesting. You've barely finished licking the questionable grease off your fingers when the scent of hot pastry floats toward you like a siren song, buttery, meaty, slightly suspicious. Your stomach makes a hopeful sound, like it's willing to forgive past mistakes if you give it one more chance. That smell? It's a meat pie, medieval style, and it's either going to delight you or end you. You follow the trail to a small wooden cart where a vendor is slicing open golden brown pastries, steam rising in thick curls. The crust is flaky, cracked just enough to let the filling peek out, though that filling is a mystery. Could be pork, could be eel, could be something he caught behind his house. The medieval meat pie was the king of street food, and for good reason. It was portable, filling, hot, and came with a built-in edible wrapper, like a hot pocket if it had been invented by someone who thought lard was a seasoning. Inside, you could find just about anything: minced beef, chopped poultry, river fish, eggs, onions, herbs, even dried fruit if the cook was feeling festive or confused. Historians still argue whether some of these combinations were born from culinary creativity or the desperate need to hide what was actually going in there. Eel and plum, goose and raisins. There are monks who would sooner take a vow of silence than defend that combo. And then there were the pies that weren't really about food at all. Some were so ornately decorated, they were more status symbol than sustenance. Think elaborate swan-shaped pastry sculptures served at noble feasts. In one recorded case, a lord presented a guest with a pie that sang, because inside was a live bird, which, predictably, panicked. Still hungry? You lean over the cart. The vendor squints at you. "This one's got rabbit," he says. "I think." He winks, which isn't as comforting as it should be. You take the pie anyway. The crust crunches perfectly, buttery and warm. The filling is savory, spiced with pepper, maybe cloves, soft, a little chewy, possibly rabbit, probably not cat. You count that as a win. This was one of the few times in a medieval day where a person might feel truly rich, that moment of biting into something warm and delicious, even if the meat was mystery and the spices stolen. Because spices, oh, they mattered. Even the tiniest dash of pepper, nutmeg, or cinnamon could transform a pie into high-end luxury, which is why people ground them into fillings like treasure, sometimes stretching a single peppercorn across 3 pastries and a prayer. Of course, not all pies were noble. Some were filled with offcuts, organ meats, or whatever could be scraped from a butcher's table at closing time. These were known affectionately as humble pies, and yes, that's where the phrase comes from. There was also a brief obsession with fish pies, especially during Lent. And when you couldn't afford real fish, you could fake it, with salted dough molded to look like a trout and filled with spiced beans. It fooled no one, but tradition was satisfied. One London shop was known for a delicacy called the 5-meat pie, which historians believe was either a festive treat or a medieval dare. The meats rotated based on season, availability, and what had recently been hit by a wagon. You finish your pie, the last bite tasting oddly of cloves and apricot. You decide not to investigate, and you realize, standing here licking crumbs from your palm, that junk food hasn't changed much. We still want it fast, hot, flavorful, slightly alarming. Something we can eat with our hands while walking toward the next regret. And just like now, medieval folk had a complicated relationship with these delicious, greasy little lies. Preachers warned against them. Doctors frowned at them. Mothers said, "Don't eat that, you'll explode." And still, they lined up. You turn and walk away, full, a little queasy, and entirely satisfied. Because sometimes, you don't need to know what's inside the pie. You just need to know it's warm, and it's yours. You barely make it 10 steps before someone almost collides with you. A boy racing down the lane with a basket full of fried food, wobbling in his arms like treasure. Behind him, a woman with soot on her face is flipping something golden over a massive bubbling pot. The smell hits you like a hug and a dare. Crispy, salty, probably not good for you heaven. Welcome to the deep-fried corner of medieval Munchie Town. Now, if you thought deep frying was some modern invention, let's clear that up. Humans have been tossing things into hot oil since they figured out fire could do more than keep wolves away. And in medieval Europe, frying was a thing of indulgence, celebration, and, let's be honest, pure chaos. People fried cheese. They fried dough. They fried fruit dipped in batter. And if they could afford oil that week, they fried it again, because more crunch equals more joy. You wander toward the smell and find a woman dipping apple slices into a thick mixture of flour and egg, then plunging them into hot oil. The batter puffs up, browns at the edges, and emerges golden, dripping, irresistible. She hands you one on a twig. No napkin, no plate, just scalding sugar-dusted apple on a stick. You juggle it for a second before biting in. It's crunchy on the outside, soft and steaming inside, and your teeth sing a little protest. You eat it anyway. Historians still argue whether these snacks were real meals or just empty indulgences. But let's face it, when a banana fritter enters the chat, it's not about nutrition. Not then. Not now. And no, bananas weren't exactly local, but traders brought exotic fruit occasionally, and cooks fried whatever resembled one. Pears, figs, even overripe cucumbers that someone swore were basically tropical. But the real showstoppers were the festival-only fried delicacies. Enter the rose petal fritter. Yes, roses. In noble households or fancy city bakeries, cooks would dip edible rose petals in a honey egg batter, fry them until crisp, and dust them with sugar or crushed pistachios. The result? A floral crisp that whispered wealth and screamed, "We have too much time. You're not sure you'd like it, but your curiosity is loud." Frying wasn't just for desserts either. In one Milanese recipe book, there's a whole section devoted to fried things in Lent, including battered onions, fried beets, and something described only as mock fish skin. You decide not to ask. Fried cheese, though, undefeated. Chunks of cheese breaded in flour, fried in goose fat, and sometimes wrapped in dough before frying again. Cheese within crunch. The ultimate medieval nesting snack. Of course, frying wasn't for everyone. Oil was expensive, lard too. Most peasants boiled or baked when they could, but on feast days, or with extra coin from a lucky harvest. Out came the frying pans like medieval confetti. And while many believe food back then was bland, that's only if you couldn't afford the good stuff. Rich or well-connected cooks flavored their batters with saffron, cinnamon, or even tiny slivers of ginger. Imagine biting into a fritter and getting hit with warm spice and the tiniest bit of burn. And don't forget deep-fried fish. Whole river fish dunked in oil and eaten tail to snout. Crisped bones included. Protein, crunch, and a dental risk all in one. You're chewing your way through another fritter, this one made from mashed peas, garlic, and leftover barley, when someone next to you whispers, Try the honey twist. You do. It's a spiral of dough fried into a shape that looks like a sleeping cat, coated in sticky honey and sesame seeds. It's delicious. It's unmanageable. It's halfway down your shirt. You accept your fate. Because deep frying didn't just make food tasty, it made it feel special. It transformed humble ingredients into crispy little miracles. The same old dough became a golden ribbon. The same tired root vegetable became a crackling treat. And for just a moment, it wasn't about the daily grind or surviving until next planting season. It was about joy. Hot, sticky, finger-burning, deep-fried joy. You finish your last bite and exhale, eyes slightly glazed. Not from wine, just carbs. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to understand how a street full of dirt, smoke, and screaming chickens could still feel a little like paradise. As you wipe honey from your fingers, your face, somehow your elbow, you hear a faint jingling behind you. Turning, you spot a small wheeled cart being pulled by a donkey with a festive ribbon on its tail. The cart is packed with jars, cones, and twisted sticks, all sparkling in the late afternoon light. You've found the sugar dealer. Well, not quite sugar as we know it. But medieval candy makers knew a thing or two about satisfying a sweet tooth, especially if you had money, or at least knew someone who did. You drift closer. On the cart's surface, neat little piles of candied fennel seeds, ginger cubes, and sugar-coated almonds twinkle like edible treasure. One jar has what looks like tiny snowballs, hard sugar pearls meant to freshen breath, or, alternately, break teeth. Sugar in the Middle Ages was both a luxury and a status symbol. Imported at great cost, often from far-flung places like Cyprus or North Africa, it was expensive, rare, and deeply coveted. When it appeared in food, it wasn't subtle. No quiet sweetness here. Sugar was shouted, flaunted, weaponized. Candies weren't just for kids either. Adults indulged with zero shame, especially nobles. Imagine a courtier daintily popping a clove-studded sugar ball into their mouth while discussing whether to invade the neighboring duchy. Sophisticated chaos. One of the most popular treats? Spiced sugar pastilles. Compressed little tablets made from sugar mixed with spices like cinnamon, cardamom, and pepper. They doubled as sweets and breath fresheners. Historians still argue whether they worked or just made everything worse in a minty way. The vendor eyes you and offers a small sliver of preserved quince rolled in sugar and shaped like a tiny dragon. You bite it. It's tart, fragrant, and oddly chewy, like fruit leather got promoted. Not bad. And then there were the elite-only confections, sugar sculptures, marzipan castles, edible heraldic shields, and entire banquet centerpieces made from molded, dyed sugar. These were often destroyed with wild glee at the end of feasts, like edible piñatas of opulence. One infamous noble once commissioned a life-size sugar unicorn for his daughter's wedding. It collapsed halfway through the meal and was eaten by dogs. The symbolism practically wrote itself. Not all candy was pretty. Some came in the form of sucket, chunks of candied fruit and peel stored in heavy syrup, slurped from jars like medieval marmalade. Sticky, sharp, and very likely to stain your tunic. If you were lower on the economic ladder, your sweets were simpler. Honeyed nuts, molasses-dipped berries, or if you were lucky, a molten lump of raw sugar stuck to a stick. Like a medieval lollipop, except it didn't come wrapped, you just hoped no flies got there first. Still, sugar was power. A spice merchant caught sneaking sugar across city lines without paying tax could be fined heavily, or forced to eat his contraband in one sitting as a humiliating punishment. According to one dubious account, a man once attempted this and had to be rolled home in a wheelbarrow. Legendary. Children, of course, were sugar-obsessed. Medieval texts mention kids lingering at the booths of sweetmeats, trying to charm sellers with songs or, more commonly, pilfer the goods when no one was looking. Nothing changes. And while most sugar came in hard loaves that had to be chipped, grated or hammered into submission, some apothecaries sold sugar drugs, tiny medicated confections for stomachaches, bad moods or mysterious female conditions. Often they tasted terrible, but that didn't stop anyone from pretending they worked. You take another tiny candy from the vendor, something called dragée. It's a sugar-coated spice ball. You pop it into your mouth and instantly regret it. It tastes like a nutmeg brawl. But you nod politely, because part of the experience is the drama. Eating sugar in the Middle Ages wasn't just snacking. It was performance, ritual, and occasionally a power move. Rich people flexed their wealth in sugar. Doctors claimed it healed. Kids begged for it. Bakers feared it. It could burn, clump, spoil, or attract ants large enough to unionize. And still, the demand was endless. You walk away sticky-fingered, slightly nauseous, and wondering whether medieval people had dentists. Spoiler, they sort of did, and they were terrifying. But you don't regret it, because in a world full of bitter ale and turnip soup, a moment of sweetness, even chaotic, spicy, hard as a rock sweetness, was worth every coin and every cracked molar. You're still trying to scrape crystallized sugar from your sleeve when a new smell creeps up, malty, warm, almost bready. You follow it like a cartoon character floating toward a pie on a windowsill. And then you see it, a man with forearms like tree trunks ladling thick stew into bread bowls the size of your head, next to barrels of foamy ale and jugs of cloudy cider. Welcome to the carb carnival. In medieval towns, beer and bread weren't just food, they were a lifestyle, especially when you were on the move, and sometimes bread was the bowl. Because why waste pottery when your dish can soak up lunch? You wander closer, eyeing the bread bowl setup, its half rustic charm, half soggy science experiment. The crust is thick enough to hold a stew that smells like onions, salt pork, lentils, and a hint of something smoky. Maybe actual smoke, maybe smoked fish. Hard to say. The ladler gives you a nod, carves off the bowl top, fills it with stew, and hands it over with exactly zero ceremony. It's heavier than expected. You nearly drop it. The bread groans a little under the weight. Or maybe you do. You sit on a barrel and dig in. Bread bowls, sometimes called trencher loaves, were common in taverns and markets, especially among the hungry and hurried. They soaked up flavor, eliminated the need for washing, and doubled as seconds and thirds. And, if you were really poor, tomorrow's breakfast. Historians still argue whether people actually ate the trencher or just handed it off to beggars or servants after the meal. Some evidence suggests the outer crust was reused, passed down like the world's saddest heirloom. But while peasants ate coarse rye or barley bread, nobles dined on fine white wheat loaves, a rare luxury and one of the most tightly regulated foods in medieval Europe. So much so that bakers could be publicly shamed for loaves that were too light, too small, or too dry. Imagine going to jail over an undercooked baguette. As for drinks, beer and ale were the stars of the junk food scene. Cheap, filling, and safer than most water. Especially in cities, ale was practically a side dish. It wasn't super strong, unless you splurged on the triple brewed stuff, in which case it hit harder than a knight on a horse. That kind of ale was often sweetened with honey or fruit and served at festivals, where everyone got sticky, loud, and vaguely philosophical. Cider made its mark in apple-growing regions, with bubbly, slightly sour versions being popular in England and Normandy. Some ciders were so sharp they practically pickled your insides, but people drank them anyway, because hydration was relative, and so were standards. You sip some cider from a shared mug. It's cloudy, tart, slightly fizzy, and aggressively unfiltered. You cough. The mug is passed to someone else. Communal germs weren't a thing yet. Ignorance is refreshing. And just when you think your bread bowl adventure can't get messier, someone next to you pulls out a meat and ale pie, a dense pastry pocket stuffed with shredded meat, gravy and barley, all soaked in beer and baked until firm enough to survive a drop kick. You're jealous. Another favorite of market days, cheese and ale pairings. Not fancy pairings like modern foodies brag about, just a wedge of sharp, hard cheese shoved in one hand and a mug of warm beer in the other. Protein and carbs. Done. Back at the barrel, your bread bowl is now a sagging mass of soup-soaked crust. You rip a piece off the side and eat it. It's mushy, meaty, and slightly acidic. Fantastic. In a world without fast food chains or plastic forks, this was how junk food worked. Liquid and solid together, handheld and edible, satisfying and chaotic. And best of all? No dishes to clean. You toss the last piece of soggy bread to a dog that's been staring at you for 20 minutes. He takes it, pauses, and eats it politely. Even medieval dogs had table manners. You stand, brush crumbs off your legs, and nod to the man at the stall. He nods back, no words needed. Just stew, bread, and mutual understanding. Because in the medieval world, sometimes dinner was the bowl. And if you played your cards right, dessert. As you meander away from the stew-laden chaos of the bread bowl brigade, a distinct aroma pulls you in another direction, smoky, oily, a little charred, and somehow nostalgic. You find yourself drifting toward a smoky alley corner where a cluster of hungry townsfolk stands around a sizzling spit. Someone's roasting meat on sticks, flipping them with practiced flicks of the wrist while grease pops and crackles onto the fire below. Welcome to the medieval version of a kebab stall. You edge closer, and a woman in a soot-streaked apron thrusts one into your hand without asking. "Pigeon," she says. "Or maybe crow." You blink. She shrugs. "Still hot." It is. Very hot. You juggle it for a moment before taking a tentative bite. Salty. Crispy at the edges. Surprisingly, not terrible. Grilled meat on a stick was a street food staple, especially in towns where space was tight and appetites were tighter. You didn't need tables, plates, or even shoes that worked. Just a stick, a fire, and something vaguely edible to char. These skewers went by many names: sippets, skewed meats, or poor man's roast. The meat, whatever was available. Pigeon, rabbit, liver, hearts, eel. Yes, eel on a stick was real, or even mystery organ meat with a little flour rubbed on to fake a crust. Historians still argue whether these snacks were viewed as meals or guilty pleasures. Some texts praise them as festive fare for holidays, while others suggest people scarfed them down like late-night tacos, delicious, fast, and a source of lingering regret. You take another bite and nod in agreement with both camps. For those with fancier tastes and coin to match, grilled skewers might be seasoned with pepper, vinegar, cloves, or garlic, or dipped in sauces made from wine, broth, or fermented fish paste called garum. Sounds questionable. Smells worse. But apparently made everything taste medieval-level gourmet. One cook once bragged about glazing a quail on a spit with rosewater and crushed almonds. Another used honey mixed with mustard. Because why not? Burnt sugar makes everything fancier. Or stickier. You pause as a younger boy passes by offering roasted root vegetables on a twig, turnips, onions, even beet chunks. Fire roasted and slightly blackened, they're the ancient version of a plant-based snack. Probably healthier. Definitely harder to chew. Still, you grab one. Charred carrot. Surprisingly sweet. Your body is grateful for something that isn't made of grease and flour. Then there were the fish on a stick crowd. Coastal towns had tiny fish roasted whole, heads and tails intact, skewered on twigs and grilled until the skin crackled. Locals ate them bones and all, like medieval chips. You try one. Crunchy, salty, and just a little too real. If you were rich, or just liked to pretend, you could also find spit-roasted fowl lollipops. Think chicken legs tied with twine and roasted over coals, served on fancy skewers carved from polished bone. The original Renaissance fair turkey leg, but messier. You glance around and notice some folks dipping their skewers into bowls of mustard or vinegar. No ketchup, no ranch, no sweet chili aioli, but flavor nonetheless. Sharp, acidic. Definitely made by someone with more ambition than clean fingernails. And of course, there were vegetarian options, though not quite for ethical reasons, more like budgetary ones. Onions, leeks, and even bread crusts were grilled, rubbed with garlic or oil if available, and sold as a toothsome delight. A fancy phrase for charred starch with attitude. Skewers were easy to carry, easy to share, and great for walking and arguing at the same time. Which, by the way, was practically a medieval pastime. Nothing like yelling about land rights with your mouth full of grilled eel. You finish the pigeon or crow mystery stick and toss the skewer into a communal pile. A nearby man is using them to start a new fire. Recycling 1300 style. And as you step away from the sizzling hearth, lips tingling from salt and smoke, you realize how universal the joy is. Hot food, grilled to imperfection, eaten in the open air, surrounded by people also chewing something they can't quite identify. It's messy, it's loud, it's oddly comforting. Because in the end, who needs fine dining when you've got dinner on a stick? You're halfway through digesting your skewered feast when a shout rises from around the corner. Get your hot nuts here. Fresh roasted. Smells like heaven. Tastes like sin. You blink, both alarmed and intrigued. That's a pitch you don't hear every day. You round the corner to find a man with a metal pan over coals, tossing a mix of chestnuts, almonds, and maybe hazelnuts with a wooden paddle. The scent is smoky sweet, earthy, and almost buttery. It wraps around your senses like a warm blanket, and considering the cold bite in the air, it's welcome. He scoops a portion into a little cloth cone and hands it to you. Don't burn your fingers, lad. You absolutely do. Roasted nuts might not sound glamorous, but in the Middle Ages, they were snack royalty. Street vendors hawked them at markets, church festivals, tournaments, and execution days, because why not turn everything into a picnic? They were filling, easy to carry, and, most importantly, they kept well, making them the medieval version of a vending machine item. Chestnuts were a staple in many regions, especially in areas where wheat was scarce. People ground them into flour, added them to soups, or roasted them as snacks. A good chestnut, roasted just right, was soft on the inside, crisp on the outside, and better than bread for some. Add a dash of salt or honey glaze, and you had something close to caramel popcorn without the corn. Historians still argue whether nut roasting was primarily a poor man's snack or a universal treat. Some sources show noble households serving sugared almonds and candied pine nuts at banquets, while others describe peasants roasting whatever they could scavenge in a communal fire. Nuts were everyone's business. One quirky treat? Spiced walnuts, rolled in crushed pepper and honey. Sweet, spicy, crunchy, like trail mix got invited to a fancy dinner. You try one from a nearby bowl. Your tongue tingles, your eyes water a bit, and you consider crying softly into your cone. But no, it's actually kind of amazing. Then there's the medieval favorite known as comfits. Tiny seeds, fennel, anise, even coriander, rolled in layers of sugar until they formed a hard little bead. Think jawbreaker meets herbal lozenge. They were sold at fairs, used as breath mints, and occasionally prescribed as digestive aids by medieval doctors who were clearly just trying to justify their sweet tooth. These comfits were ridiculously time-consuming to make. Each bead had to be stirred constantly while sugar syrup was added drop by drop in a hot pan until it hardened layer by layer. It was less snack-making, more culinary witchcraft, and only the wealthy had the time or servants to pull it off. You nibble one. It tastes like black licorice and betrayal. You make a mental note to fake enthusiasm if someone ever gifts you a pouch of them. One nearby kid is selling candied nuts on strings, worn around the neck like edible jewelry. Practical? No. Sticky? Absolutely. But popular. Another teen offers smoked almonds dusted with dried rose petals. You stare, they wink. It's weirdly romantic. At some larger events, think royal weddings, coronations, or major saints' days, you'd see entire stalls devoted to nut-based snacks. Almond fritters, walnut paste rolled in sugar, pistachio-stuffed dates, and if you were truly decadent, nut brittle hardened with honey and cracked with a mallet. Crunchy, sweet, and likely to chip a tooth. Pure luxury. And yes, nuts made their way into drinks too. Almond milk wasn't just a dairy-free option. It was a staple in medieval cooking, especially during Lent when animal products were off the menu. Rich folks might sip warm, spiced almond milk with cloves and saffron. Poor folks just hoped a squirrel dropped something. You look down at your roasted nut cone, half gone. Warm. Comforting. Slightly burnt. It's a medieval snack success story. Because in a time when refrigeration didn't exist, when baking was an ordeal, and when meat could be a monthly miracle, nuts were a rare constant. Nutritious, portable, and yes, delicious when covered in sugar, salt, or whatever spice could be smuggled past the church tax. You eat the last sticky almond, toss the cone into a nearby basket, and exhale through your nose, now scented vaguely of pepper and firewood. And as the sun starts to dip, you realize that for medieval folk, junk food wasn't just about convenience, it was about resilience. It was finding joy in small bites, warmth in shared snacks, and satisfaction from roasted things eaten with burned fingers. Because if you were going to live through flea plagues, freezing winters, and a distinct lack of dental care, you at least deserved a warm cone of honeyed nuts. The sun dips low behind the crooked rooftops, casting long shadows across the muddy street as torches sputter to life. And just when you think you've seen the full medieval snack spread, you hear a bell, a soft clink followed by the slow roll of wooden wheels. You turn toward the sound, and there it is. The medieval dessert cart. It's a creaky wooden thing, painted a faded red, with chipped edges and a canvas flap overhead. Hanging from hooks are tiny cloth pouches, each labeled with hand-scrawled symbols. Beneath them sit jars of syrup, baskets of dried fruits, and slabs of what looks suspiciously like fudge, except it's crumbly, pale, and smells oddly like lavender. The woman running the cart catches your gaze and smiles. Fancy a bit of sweetmeat? You freeze. It's not actual meat, is it? She cackles. Not today. She hands you a small square wrapped in waxed linen. You peel it back. It's a cube of pressed almond paste, soft and sugary, studded with little candied rose petals. You bite in. It's dense, floral, slightly oily, and somehow rich without being sweet in the way you're used to. In the Middle Ages, this would have been a prime dessert for the upper crust, a treat of almonds ground with sugar and shaped into hearts, animals or letters for weddings and feasts. Marzipan before it got overly fondanty. Historians still argue whether marzipan was a luxury or a medicinal aid, since apothecaries sold almond-based confections to soothe the spleen and calm excess choler. Translation: it cured nothing, but it was tasty enough to pretend. Next up, syrup-soaked fruits. She spoons you a slice of poached pear soaked in honey, vinegar, and cinnamon, served on a brittle cracker. The pear is meltingly soft, the flavor unexpectedly tangy sweet, and the cracker instantly turns to sludge. You lick your fingers. Elegance is overrated. Then come leech candies. These are jelly-like cubes made from milk thickened with sugar and spices, then dried and sliced. The texture is firm but squishy, like biting into medieval jello made by someone with strong opinions and no refrigeration. You try one. Clove and nutmeg hit hard. It's bold, assertive, the candy equivalent of a handshake that lasts too long. At the far end of the cart is a jar labeled Spoon Sweets. You hesitate. She hands you a spoon. You dip into the jar and pull out what appears to be a green walnut suspended in thick syrup. You try it. It's bizarrely satisfying, bitter, sweet, chewy, and like something a wizard would eat after casting a fire spell. You're not alone in your indulgence. Children giggle as they pop dried apples dipped in sugar into their mouths, licking sticky hands. A monk ambles past, clutching a cone of candied violets with the quiet intensity of someone absolutely not sharing. A nobleman's servant buys a box of gingerbread, not soft cookies, but spiced, compressed loaves dyed with saffron and shaped into flowers. You get a crumb. It tastes like wood and molasses got into a sword fight, and everyone lost. But it's kind of great. And don't forget the Panforty-style sweets, dense blocks of nuts, dried figs, flour, wine-soaked raisins, honey, and exotic spices. More brick than cake. If dropped from a tower, it could break a toe, if sliced thin and eaten with a bit of soft cheese. Divine. These desserts weren't for every day. Most people didn't get dessert. Dessert was a festival food, a church day miracle, a traveling merchant's gift. But when it showed up, it was often elaborate, weird, and rooted in spices. Spices were the real stars, not just for flavor, but for status. Cinnamon, ginger, pepper, and saffron were as valuable as gold. So tossing them into your sweets wasn't just culinary, it was a flex. You sip from a tiny cup of clove-infused wine, passed around from a nearby group. It's warm, mulled, and possibly potion-like. You feel your sinuses open, and your soul briefly try to exit your body. Medicinal, right? As you stand by the cart, drowsy from sugar and spice and vague digestive confusion, the woman smiles again. Anything else, love? You shake your head. I think I've hit my medieval limit. She nods. Then you've done it right. Because in this world of mud streets and cold hearths, of long days and questionable hygiene, there was still room for joy, sticky, fragrant, weirdly textured joy that came on feast days and lucky days and nights like this one. Dessert was a ritual, a pause, a soft ending to a hard day. And sometimes that's all you needed. You wipe syrup from your chin and stumble down a darker alley, still chewing the last bit of candied walnut when you catch sight of something strange. A stall, lit by flickering lanterns, is drawing a small, giggling crowd. On the table, rows of pies, But these aren't your average medieval meat pies. No pigeon, no eel, no ambiguous brown fillings. These are hand pies, and they smell suspiciously like apples, berries, and something sweet burning very slightly. You approach just in time to see a woman slap a steaming pastry onto a wooden plank and slice it clean down the middle. Inside, sticky, bubbling plum jam, glistening like a dragon's treasure hoard. She hands it off to a wide-eyed child who immediately burns his tongue and declares it worth it. She sees you next. Fancy one, traveler, or three? You nod without answering. Your hands have already reached out. She hands you a pie wrapped in parchment. It's warm, flaky, leaking a bit at the edge. You take a bite. Hot, gooey, tart and sweet and buttery all at once. You're in trouble. In the later Middle Ages, these kinds of fruit turnovers and filled pastries became more common, especially in cities where bakers experimented with crusts that weren't just delivery systems for meat. With increased sugar availability and trade in fruits like quince, pear, and dried plums, dessert pies started appearing at festivals and markets. The most popular fillings? Plums, cherries, spiced apples, pears poached in wine, even mashed figs. Some recipes included rosewater or cinnamon, and the crust might be glazed with egg yolk or honey to give it that shiny golden finish. Historians still argue whether these pies were more meal or treat, but to you right now, it's clearly dessert. And maybe dinner. A nearby teenager is selling mini cheese pies with bits of candied orange peel folded into the crust. You stare. He grins and tosses you one. You bite in. It's sweet and savory, confusing but delightful. Your ancestors would be proud and mildly concerned. Another stand is offering fried pastries, dough cut into shapes, fried in fat, and dusted with powdered sugar. Medieval donuts, basically. One version even uses saffron in the batter. You try a wedge. It's crunchy, hollow inside, and dissolves into sugary air on your tongue. Someone behind you mumbles about frumenty fritters, a weird blend of boiled wheat, egg, milk, and dried fruit fried into golden patties. You try one. It's not bad. If oatmeal and a pancake had an unsupervised child, it would be this. And then you notice a large pot bubbling over coals, sending up clouds of spice-scented steam. A woman ladles a thick pudding into wooden bowls. It's rice pudding, a rare treat made with imported rice, milk, sugar, and a sprinkle of saffron. Probably intended for nobles, probably not being sold legally. She shrugs and hands you a spoon. I won't tell if you don't. You scoop it up. Soft, creamy, fragrant. The saffron gives it a floral note, almost perfumed. For a moment, it's silent around you as your brain tries to decide whether this is the best thing you've ever eaten, or just a warm culinary hallucination. This was the thing about medieval junk food. You never quite knew what you were getting. One bite might transport you to a royal banquet. The next might taste like old shoe with raisins. But it was all made by hand, with care, fire, and guesswork. And somehow, it worked. Dessert pies and puddings weren't daily fare. They were seasonal, festive, and sometimes ritualistic. Weddings, saints' days, harvest festivals, and even funerals might feature sweet dishes meant to bring comfort or joy, or, depending on the ingredients, mild hallucinations. You look around now and see the whole scene from a distance, firelight flickering, kids licking honey from their wrists, dogs hoping for dropped crusts, merchants hawking one last sticky bun before packing up. The air is filled with the mingling smells of spice, smoke, yeast, and heat. You take one last bite of your plum hand pie, and in that moment, you don't feel like a tourist in the past. You feel like someone who belongs here. In the land of burnt crusts, sweet syrup, and pies you eat with your hands, standing under the stars with jam on your chin. Because even centuries ago, people knew the truth. If you want to lift a weary soul, give them dessert. The jam on your chin is starting to dry into a sugary crust when you hear a rustle behind you. Then a whisper, "Over here, if you've got a copper and a strong stomach." You follow the voice to a smaller, hidden alley, barely lit. There's a small gathering of people huddled around what looks like a makeshift bench covered with a cloth. A man, greasy-haired and wide-eyed, pulls back the cloth with a flourish to reveal a tray of insects. You blink. A lot. Crunchy beetle carapace, roasted cricket legs, and honey-drizzled ants, he declares. Limited supply. Someone cheers. Someone else vomits discreetly behind a barrel. You, like the absolute legend you are, lean in closer. It turns out eating bugs wasn't unheard of in medieval Europe, especially among the poor or in times of famine. Beetles, locusts, even grasshoppers would be collected, dried, fried, or simply mashed into other things. Add some honey and vinegar, and boom, snack time. You pop a crispy ant into your mouth. Crunchy, sweet. A little weird. Definitely not worse than that clove jelly cube from earlier. Historians still argue whether these insect snacks were survival food or considered delicacies in certain regions. There are accounts of honey-roasted locusts in some Mediterranean areas, and even a few noble banquets that featured exotic, insect-based dishes to impress guests. Nothing says power like feeding people bugs with flair. The vendor hands you a tiny cone filled with deep-fried cricket legs, tossed in salt and dried mint. It's oddly satisfying, nutty, crispy, and easier to chew than roasted chickpeas. But if bugs aren't your thing, don't worry. This alley has options. A small group nearby is selling what looks like candied bark, strips of dried tree resin, sweetened and chewed like gum. Supposedly good for digestion. Tastes like peppermint, if peppermint grew inside a dusty monastery. Next to them, cheese rinds soaked in beer, fried and crisped up over flame. These are affectionately called poor man's bacon. You try one. It's chewy, salty, and more addictive than you'd like to admit. Someone passes around a bowl of puffed grains coated in honey, primitive popcorn clusters made by heating grains in earthen pots until they popped, then stirring them into syrup and letting them cool in sticky clumps. Great for nibbling. Terrible for dental work. Nearby, a woman is ladling out a fermented barley drink mixed with apple scraps and dried berries. It fizzes in your mouth and leaves you questioning whether it's a beverage or a prank. Possibly both. You sip again. You don't hate it. One stand further down the alley boasts something entirely mysterious: night cakes. Dark, dense squares made of bread soaked in wine, mashed dates, crushed nuts, and a whisper of licorice. They help you sleep, the seller claims. You chew one slowly. It tastes like fruitcake's misunderstood older brother, but it does make your eyelids feel heavier. Turns out, medieval people were very into functional snacks, foods that didn't just taste good, well, sometimes, but also soothed, calmed, or revived. Herbs like valerian, chamomile, and hyssop were mixed into treats or drinks, meant to relax the body and mind. Not quite NyQuil, but definitely trying. You try a small almond cookie laced with poppy seed paste, soft, nutty, and mildly drowsy-making. You sit down against a wooden wall, full to your eyebrows, surrounded by the crunch of beetles and the buzz of night. Everywhere around you, the night market glows gently with its combination of desperation, invention, and pure edible madness. And it hits you. Junk food, in any century, is about joy. It's about surprise. About getting something warm in your hands and sweet on your tongue after a long day of digging trenches, dodging taxes, or trying not to die from the plague. It's loud. It's greasy. It's a little questionable. And it's perfect. You close your eyes briefly, the taste of minty cricket and wine-drenched night cake lingering in your mouth. Because tonight, you're not just a time traveler, you're a medieval snacker. And this alley is your food court. Your eyes flutter open again to the sound of distant bells, soft, rhythmic, comforting. You rise from your cozy spot in the alley, cheeks sticky, fingers pleasantly coated in crumb and glaze, and head toward the source. You emerge into a square lit with torches, where a different kind of medieval junk food experience is unfolding. Festival food. In front of you, a tall pole sways with ribbons, children dance in circles, and vendors shout about deals you can't quite understand. But what you can understand is the incredible smell. Fried dough, spiced cider, molasses. Your stomach, somehow still interested, gurgles in response. The center attraction? A booth labeled simply twists. You wander over and watch as a man stretches long coils of dough, dips them into bubbling oil, and, with tongs forged by someone definitely not trained in kitchen safety, flips the golden spirals onto a tray dusted with spice sugar. "Try one," he grins, handing you a piece that's longer than your forearm. You bite. It's crispy outside, soft inside, fragrant with anise and cloves. It's like a cinnamon roll took up juggling and ran away to join a medieval circus. You keep biting. You do not regret it. This kind of fried dough treat was a staple at celebrations, harvest festivals, church feast days, spring fairs, even weddings. Sometimes called crisples, dough fritters, or, charmingly, devil's twists. They were often made with basic flour and water, fried in animal fat, then coated in honey or sugar mixed with exotic spices. Historians still argue whether the spicing of these snacks was widespread or reserved for the upper crust, literally and figuratively. But even without the sugar, people found joy in crispy dough with a hint of something special. Nearby, someone is making apple fritters, apple slices, dipped in batter, fried, and served with a drizzle of what might be honey or very ambitious sap. You take one. It's blistering hot, but your taste buds are too tired to care. Another booth offers snow cheese, not actual cheese, but a whipped egg-white dessert, sweetened and set into a soft foam. It's like meringue met a medieval cloud and decided to become a food. A few cooks even added almond milk or crushed herbs for a unique twist. You sample it. It's airy, sweet, and vanishes before your tongue realizes what happened. At the back, a barrel-shaped oven glows with orange light. Inside, flat discs of cardamom bread baked directly on the stone. They're served folded and filled with dried figs or berry paste. You grab one, chewy, fragrant. It's the wrap version of everything you've loved tonight. Suddenly, a juggler walks by, popping roasted hazelnuts into the air and catching them in his mouth. Show off. A lute player strums something lively, and a young woman hands you a cup of warm mulled cider, heavily spiced, faintly alcoholic, and likely to give you bold opinions on feudal taxes if you drink too much. The energy here is festive, communal, and frankly, a little magical. Because while most days in the Middle Ages were filled with work, mud, and disease, festivals were about joy. Food played a central role, not just to nourish, but to delight. Even if the rest of the year you were scraping burnt porridge off the bottom of a pot, tonight you could eat honey twists and dance until your boots fell apart. And the food wasn't just indulgence, it was symbolic. Browned fritters for fertility, sweetened bread for prosperity, wine-soaked cakes for blessings. They were prayers you could chew, wishes made edible. You wander past a child carrying a candied apple on a stick, likely reserved for the rarest of days. She's holding it like a jewel. You smile. She smiles back, with red sugar stuck to every visible surface of her face. As the night deepens, people sit on crates and barrels, trading bites of fried cheese with neighbors they only talk to once a year. Someone starts roasting a whole fruit-stuffed pastry over a fire, the medieval s'more, if s'mores were mostly figs and ambition. And you, sticky-handed and cider-warmed, settle onto a step and exhale. Because this is what medieval junk food was all about. Community. Celebration. Temporarily forgetting how awful life was the rest of the time. Sure, tomorrow you'll go back to stale bread and fish that smells like it's plotting revenge. But tonight, you've eaten twisted sweets and laughed beside firelight. Tonight you've tasted something close to happiness, crispy, flaky, and dunked in syrup. You lean back on the cool stone step, arms crossed over your very full belly, and stare up at the sky. It's dark now, medieval dark. Not city dark with street lamps and phone screens, but deep, ink-black, star-prickled dark, the kind that reminds you how very small and crumb-covered you are. The festival is winding down, and so are your legs. But the scent of smoke and spice still lingers in the air, pulling you toward one last food stall, tucked near the chapel steps. This one's quiet. No shouting vendors, no children elbowing each other for fried apples. Just a lone woman seated behind a small table, covered in what appear to be bread puddings. You can't help yourself. She nods as you approach. End of day. You look like someone who needs a midnight bite. She slices a warm brown square and passes it to you on a piece of parchment. You take a bite and immediately understand. This is the medieval version of leftover magic. Made from scraps of stale bread, soaked in milk or ale, sweetened with dried fruits, and sometimes, if you were lucky, spiced with nutmeg or cinnamon. Bread puddings were the unsung heroes of the medieval sweet world. Not flashy, not festival fare, but cozy, humble, and surprisingly delicious. Some households called them poor cakes. Others had more poetic names, like pan morsel or fruited spoon bread. The key ingredient was always economy, using what was left from the day before and transforming it into something warming. You sit on a nearby barrel, letting the warmth from the pudding seep into your soul. It's soft, eggy, and scattered with bits of raisin, fig, and maybe citrus peel. There's even a hint of ale, giving it that sweet, sour tang. Historians still argue whether these puddings were born out of necessity or passed down as treasured recipes. Some say monks perfected the formula for monastery leftovers. Others believe market wives shared their own late-night versions, like neighborhood secrets. Either way, they've endured. Next to you, a man with a lute starts humming softly. He's nursing a wheat cake smeared with honey and topped with crushed hazelnuts, flat, thin, and sweetened with whatever was left in the kitchen. These were common among traveling performers, pilgrims, and exhausted dads who didn't want to cook. You consider stealing a bite. You don't. You're not a monster. You look back to the stall and spot something curious. Small dough balls pierced on sticks, each one rolled in poppy seeds and glazed in something shiny. You raise an eyebrow. Sleep snacks, the vendor says. Almond flour honey, a touch of valerian root. You'll be dreaming in 10 minutes. You nod solemnly, because that sounds like exactly the sort of shady herbal snack you'd expect in this century, and you're into it. It hits you then how much of medieval junk food was built around mood. Some to keep you awake on night watch, some to warm your belly after hauling bricks all day, some to get you through a wedding without punching your cousin. And others? Just to ease you into sleep with something soft and warm. You chew your valerian dough ball thoughtfully. It's nutty, a little grassy, and just sweet enough to make you forget the taste of vinegar wine from earlier. Behind you, someone selling milk curds folded with rose jam, served in little wooden bowls carved like flower petals. Children slurp them up while their parents sip something herby and look mildly overwhelmed by everything. And just when you think your night has peaked, someone brings around a sack of leftovers. Not trash, never trash. These are the final bites, the corners, the overcooked edges, the sticky bits stuck to the pan, the parts with too much caramel, too little structure, and the kind of chew that takes effort. You take one and realize, this might be the best thing you've eaten all night, because there's joy in the imperfect, the uneven, the oops, it burned a little. And no one knew that better than medieval cooks with open fires and no timers. Around you now, the world has gone soft, the lights dim. The last of the cider is poured, the laughter fades to hums. People sit on cobblestones and lean on each other, bellies full and fingers sticky. You curl your legs under you and sigh, because this was more than junk food, it was an edible story, a ritual, a rare and perfect pause. You blink slowly as the warmth of bread pudding and valerian dough balls begins to nudge you towards sleep. But just when you think the night is over, a soft ding rings out behind you. You turn, and there it is. The midnight oven. It's not part of the official festival. No signs, no merchant calls, no prices. Just a low stone hearth glowing beneath a sloping roof at the edge of the square. A few locals stand around it, whispering, waiting. You shuffle closer, more curious than hungry now. An old man pulls a tray from the coals. On it, crisped root cakes, browned and crumbling, smelling faintly of beet and barley, and something oddly sweet. He sees you looking. Last batch of the night, he murmurs, handing you one without a word more. You hold it carefully. It's rough, irregular, a lump of mystery. You bite in. The outside crunches like toasted oats. The inside is chewy and soft, with bits of dried carrot, fennel seed, and crushed date. It's unexpected, comforting. Like if a granola bar wandered into a medieval apothecary and stayed too long. This, it turns out, is a night watch cake, a kind of snack made for guards, bakers, and anyone pulling the late shift. High in calories, easy to hold, and full of whatever scraps were lying around. It's not beautiful, but it gets the job done. Historians still argue whether these were invented out of tradition or pure exhaustion. Some claim monastic kitchens made them for clerics who kept vigil. Others say townsfolk just baked whatever wouldn't burn while they slept. Either way, they're perfect for this moment. Next to the hearth, a younger woman hands out tiny clay pots of something steamy and sweet-smelling. You peer into yours. It's a hot mash of wheat and milk, thickened with honey and cinnamon, with a whisper of lavender. The texture is like a hug in food form. She nods. It's called sleep porridge, best served with silence. You oblige. The porridge is smooth, soothing, and pleasantly floral. You sip slowly as the night quiets even further. Around the fire, the crowd has shifted from snack mode to storytelling mode. People share dreams, superstitions, and bizarre recipes whispered down from forgotten grandmothers. Someone describes a cake baked with ashes from a blessed yew tree, meant to protect a household from nightmares. Another swears by a poppy seed and barley loaf that keeps sleep demons away. You're not sure you believe any of it, but the stories go down almost as smooth as the porridge. Someone hands you a star biscuit, a small 5-pointed cookie made with honey, clove, and just a hint of rue. Bitter and sweet all at once. You're told it's eaten to guide dreams. You're pretty sure that means have weird visions and try not to panic. But honestly, you're ready for it. Around you, the fire dims. The food is gone. Only crumbs, whispers, and the soft creak of wooden carts being wheeled away remain. But you're still here, warm from your toes to your eyelids, with the taste of sleep porridge still soft on your tongue. You think back over everything you've eaten. Crisples, clove jelly, honey-fried roots, lavender cream, cricket legs, pudding crusts. You've traveled through the strangest buffet imaginable, and you did it without a fork in sight. Because medieval junk food wasn't about convenience. It was about making magic from scarcity, about sweetening the rough edges of life with spice, fire, and community. And somehow, that made it feel timeless. The stars overhead blink gently as if nodding in agreement. One last yawn escapes your lips, and you let yourself sink against the stone wall, arms around your knees, the clay cup cradled in your hands. Somewhere, someone plays a lute too slowly. Someone snores against a basket of dried apples. The town exhales, and so do you. Because this night, filled with roasted sweets and sleepy laughter, has reminded you that food is more than fuel. It's a lullaby you can taste. You shift slightly on the cold stone, and the last drops of warm porridge settle in the bottom of your cup. The stars above seem to pulse in rhythm with your heartbeat, slow, steady, full. You glance around at the emptying square. The firelight glows low. A dog is curled beside a cartwheel. A candle flickers from the chapel window. And across from you, 2 children are finishing what may be the very last treat of the night. Sugar bricks. They're just what they sound like. Pressed blocks of crystallized sugar, sometimes flavored with herbs or wrapped in thin edible paper. The children gnaw at the corners like beavers working through candy cinder blocks. You can't help but smile. These little bricks were a luxury, a byproduct of imported cane sugar, only available to the wealthiest or sneakiest. But for special occasions, or when sugar smugglers passed through, the local bakers would whip up small, rock-like blocks for kids to suck on for hours. You remember hearing someone say they were used to keep children quiet during Mass. You're not surprised. You're kind of tempted to try one yourself. Nearby, a baker is wrapping up her things, but you spot a few charcoal crackers left on her table, flat wafers made of flour, a little sugar, and a trace of ground charcoal or ash, believed by some to aid digestion, or, at the very least, absorb the sins of gluttony. You munch one. It tastes like slightly sweet toast that got left in the fire, but you weirdly enjoy it. Next to her, another cook is scooping the last of a molasses barley taffy from a cooling tray. It's sticky, stretchy, and being wrapped around sticks like medieval lollipops. You take one for the road. It pulls at your teeth like it wants to keep you awake, but the sugary chew is oddly hypnotic. Historians still argue whether these late-night sweet stalls were common or seasonal, whether this scene happened in every market square or just the especially festive ones. But standing here now, you believe it. Every bite, every flavor, every voice around the fire says the same thing. We've always needed comfort. And sometimes, that comfort tastes like burnt sugar and toasted grain. As you stretch your legs and get ready to wander back toward wherever bed exists in this dreamlike medieval moment, an older man beckons you over to his table. He's selling only one thing: spiced pebbles. They look like little gray stones, each the size of a thumbprint. You frown, pick one up, and tap it against your teeth. Hard, real hard. Just suck on it, he advises, like a philosopher. You do, and slowly, the outside softens. Inside is a burst of clove, pepper, honey, and orange peel. It's intense, sharp, refreshing, sort of like a medieval mint, if mints were invented by someone going through something emotional. They were once used to settle the stomach, freshen the breath, and keep you awake through long sermons. Monks supposedly chewed them to resist sleep. You chuckle at the irony. You walk away with your pebble mint in one cheek, thinking about all the food you've tried tonight. And not just the snacks themselves, but the rituals, the reasons, the weird beliefs. How each crumb was part of something bigger, community, superstition, survival. And somewhere in that mix, joy. Because even in a world where hot baths were rare and shoes were optional, people still made room for sweets. For celebration. For chewing something so spicy it made your nose run. And maybe, just maybe, they felt a little better because of it. Your footsteps echo lightly on the stones as you pass one last cart, abandoned but still fragrant with the scent of fried cheese balls and pear fritters. You smile to yourself, already dreaming of breakfast. The night is folding in, gently, like dough rising slowly in a warm clay oven. And you? You are full. Not just in the belly, but in the soul. You pass beyond the festival square now, your feet slower, heavier, your breath visible in the cool night air. The lanterns behind you flicker smaller and smaller until they're just warm dots in the dark. Your hands still smell like nutmeg and smoke. Your teeth are sticky with sugar. Your heart, calm. There's one last place to visit before the dream lets go of you entirely. A narrow bridge arches over a quiet stream, and across it sits a tiny baker's cottage with one crooked chimney and a window glowing orange from within. You follow the scent, wood smoke and honey, and something else. Something floral. You knock. No one answers, but the door is open. Of course it is. Inside, it's warm. The floor is stone, the walls lined with dried herbs, and the oven crackles in the corner like it's telling a bedtime story of its own. On a wooden table sits a tray of rose hip and oat cookies, left out like offerings. No one's around. But a note reads, "For wanderers, take only what you need." You do. One soft cookie. Crumbly and tart, sweetened just enough to count. You sit on a bench beside the fire and nibble slowly, watching shadows flicker on the walls. The cookie tastes like a lullaby. This is where it hits you. Junk food wasn't just for fun. It was memory. It was identity. A biscuit flavored with rosemary could remind someone of a wedding long past. A fried turnip cake might echo the tastes of a home you haven't seen in 20 years. A toasted nutball might recall the quiet joy of a child's first winter feast. Historians still argue whether these foods were truly indulgent or simply what was available. Some see them as accidents of economy, others as intentional acts of joy. Either way, they mattered. You sip from a cup left beside the cookies, some sort of barley infusion, warm and gentle. It settles your stomach and your thoughts all at once. You look around the tiny space. Every object seems wrapped in a story. The hand-whittled spoon, the jar of preserved lavender, the soot-kissed lantern hanging from a wooden peg. You imagine the baker who lives here. Maybe she's long gone. Maybe she's out gathering honey. Maybe she's asleep upstairs, dreaming of cinnamon and stars. Outside, the wind rustles softly through dry leaves. You stand, stretching, and wrap the cookie in a cloth square from the table. A gift. A final taste for the road back to your time. You step out into the night. The walk home is quiet. Just your footsteps and the occasional owl. But your belly is full, your spirit soothed, and your brain humming with the sweet hum of breadcrumbs, honey, and shared memory. Because medieval junk food wasn't about craving. It was about belonging. To a place, to a feast, to a moment, to a world that knew life was hard and made it a little softer with a fried apple and a whisper of clove. And now, as the sky lightens ever so slightly, and the stars begin to fade into the hush of morning, you feel your body slow. It's time to rest, to dream, to carry with you the quiet truth that even in the muddiest centuries, even in the harshest winters, someone, somewhere, still made you a cookie. You lie back on a patch of soft grass at the edge of the world, your eyelids heavy now, your limbs a little sweeter than they were hours ago. The sounds of the festival have faded into memory, and the taste of barley, honey, and warm bread still lingers on your tongue like a fading song. The stars above stretch wide and slow, like a soft spun blanket being pulled across the sky. You breathe in. The scent of roasted chestnuts and toasted oats still curls in the air like wood smoke that's forgotten where it came from. Your thoughts drift, slow, syrupy, peaceful. You remember the chewy poppy cookies, the rose hip crunch, the sticky molasses lollipops you sucked until they dissolved into nothing. And you remember the faces of strangers who shared their scraps, of children whose smiles were stained red from sugar, of vendors who cooked for joy, not coin. Let it all blur now. Let the cobblestones of the old market fade. Let the night porridge soften into dreams. The world is quieter now. Your breath is steady, your hands finally still. And somewhere in the distance, someone is pulling fresh buns from an oven, dusting them with cinnamon, placing them carefully beside the hearth. They'll wait for you. But for now, sleep. Rest your full heart, your crumb-streaked hands, your busy mind. The world will still be hungry tomorrow. But you feasted.